are listening to I Am Refocused Radio with your host, Shamaya Reed. This show is designed to inspire you to live your purpose and regain your focus. And now, here's your host, Shamaya Reed.
Hey, welcome to I Am Refocused Radio. We are here once again, and today we have a true amazing guest. We're going to talk to Robin Bartlett and his amazing book, Vietnam Combat, Firefights, and Writing History. And first and foremost, there's so many details in this story that I just really want to jump right into the show and say, first of all, thank you, Robin, for all you've done and for writing this project. I understood that it took about 10 years to write and another additional 2 years to get ready for publishing. So congrats on your book and welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. This is great. Great to be with you.
Yes, sir. And man, I read the chapters you wanted me to read to prepare for this interview, and I must say, it's like a roller coaster ride. It was a page turner. I couldn't stop reading. So kind of start with the audience a little bit about yourself and your family, because I understand that you have a family that is very heavily involved in military careers, including your grandfather, your father, and your brother. So kind of start there, a little bit about your family.
Sure. And just a quick background on the book. It did take me 10 years to write this book, and I ended up writing it primarily because I had talked with a lot of Vietnam veterans, and I found that a number of things happened to me in Vietnam that did not happen to them. And so that kind of, each one of those events became a story in my book. But as you say, I do come from a military family. My grandfather, father, and brother all attended West Point. And I turned down an appointment to West Point because as a military brat, I went to 13 elementary and middle schools. And by the time I got to college, I said, I have had enough of the military. I had enough of moving around. And I wanted nothing to do with the military. But it was, the Vietnam War was growing, and 18-year-olds were being drafted on a regular basis. And because of my family, I knew I had to serve as an officer. So I went into the ROTC program, and it was just really second nature to me. So I fell right back into it and graduated as a distinguished military graduate. And at the ripe age of 21, knowing everything there was to know, right? The 21-year-olds always know everything there is to know. I volunteered for airborne, ranger, infantry, and special and assignment to the 82nd Airborne Division, and I got everything that I asked for.
And your next chapter was driving from California to Fort Bragg, North Carolina. And what was that process like in your mind? Were you excited to turn the page to what's coming next in your life? What was going through your mind at that time?
I really was excited about it. I graduated and was commissioned on the same day. And 2 days later, my car packed with all my personal belongings. I'm driving across the United States en route to my first duty assignment at the 82nd Airborne Division, and got there, processed in, and I was what they called a leg. In other words, I had not gone through jump school. So when I got assigned to my company commander was a very intelligent man, and he decided he would not assign me as a platoon leader with airborne troops because I was not airborne trained at that point in time. And I worked in the office and did administrative types of work for about a month and a half. And then I got orders sending me on down to Fort Benning, Georgia, where I went through jump school and infantry officers basic course and ranger school. And ranger school was actually the most challenging training that the Army had to offer. Still is, really. And it was the best insurance policy for going to Vietnam, and I knew that was in my future.
Once again, this time, Refocus Radio, talking to our special guest today, Robin Bartlett, and his amazing book, Vietnam Combat Firefights and Writing History. With your family being heavily in the military, what was the reaction from your parents when they found out that you were gearing up and being prepared to go to Vietnam?
Well, again, if you come from a military family and you've served in, my father had a 30-year career. My brother had served in Vietnam already. And there was a sole surviving son rule, which kept him out of a second tour in Vietnam. And they sent him to Korea. My brother served, was a career officer also. So it was kind of expected. It was not unusual. It was just part of the my family took the service to our country, took those words very, very seriously. They meant a lot to us. We were, in fact, in service to our country. That was the way we thought about it. In fact, when I answered the phone at home, I answered it by saying, "Colonel Bartlett's quarters, may I help you, sir?" That was the way, as a child, I answered the phone.
And with this mindset of already kind of knowing the military lifestyle, were you, because there's so many great stories, there's a lot of serious stories, but also some funny stories in your book, but there was a project that you were given assignment to do some investigating and writing. I think you had a 22-page report you gave, and your superior asked you to slim it down a little bit. If you can, share a little bit of like a teaser of that story for the audience.
So, yeah, I was a comparative literature major in college, so I was very comfortable with reading and writing and reading and writing. It just came naturally to me. And as I mentioned, my company commander decided not to assign me down at the platoon level, so I was doing some paperwork, administrative work, and he assigned me a report of survey. So, I started to research all the regulations about writing a report of survey. And this report had to do with a soldier who had gone AWOL for a period of time and lost all of his belongings. So I just took this assignment very, very seriously and interviewed the other soldiers in the area. And I took statements and I had them all typed up and signed. And I wrote up the report and decided that this soldier should not be charged because he left his unit, he left his belongings properly secured with a lock, blah, blah, blah. And it ended up about 22 pages in length. And I turned it in to the S4, and the S4 is the property manager of a battalion, warrant officer. And he called me into his office and he threw the paper back at me and he said, "What the F is this? This is crazy. Rewrite this, charge the soldier for the $200, 22 pages for a $200 penalty, 3 paragraphs, short words, and send it back to me tomorrow." So I went back to my company and my company commander was laughing. They were all laughing at me, but it was a good lesson learned. I learned, sometimes less is more, and you want to fit the report to the situation.
You did a lot of intense training in the beginning, and I believe I recall you met a guy named Church. He was a SEAL. If you could tell the audience how'd you met the guy and how much of an influence was he during your training?
Well, he actually helped me get through Ranger School, and Ranger School was as I mentioned, was the toughest training that the Army has to this day has to offer. I think SEAL training is more physically demanding, and I think that probably SEAL training is the toughest military training there is out there. I would certainly argue that point. But Ranger School for me was very, very demanding. Why? Primarily because I'm short, I have short legs, And we went on a lot of forced marches, and I would start at the front of the pack and walk as fast as I possibly could. And then when I reached the end of because everybody was passing me, I'd run back up to the front. Well, that didn't work very well. And church, we went through with 2 Navy SEALs who were just in incredible physical condition. They could outrun us. They would go through the obstacle course, just lickety split, do pull-ups and sit-ups and push-ups infinitely. And church said to me, "Here, grab onto my pack frame, and you will keep up with me." And he literally pulled me along on a 20-mile force march, which we were all required to complete in order to earn our Ranger certification. And then when it came time for me, Ranger School would test you at the point at which you reached total exhaustion and fatigue, both mental and physical, and hunger, because if you didn't make your objective, you didn't eat. And I appointed church as my, what we found with the SEALs was that we helped them with the planning and the operational aspect of planning an operation. And then they helped us on so many times when somebody was having a tough time physically. They would pick up their weapon. They'd carry 2 weapons. They'd carry the other man's pack. They were just incredible.
Inside the book, before it even starts, you give like a little paint a picture of what people were, their attitude were in the United States during the time, with how media was showing the stories and, everything with Vietnam. How important was it for the readers when they've read your book to have both your perspective, your experience, and also understanding the temperature in America and how the culture was in the United States?
Well, in many respects, I was fortunate because I went to Vietnam before the height of the protest movement in the United States. And when I came back, I still was in the military. I was actually at that point in time a regular Army officer, and I had an additional duty station to go to. And I stayed with my parents. I was a bachelor. I stayed with my parents and down in Monterey, California, and I was basically removed from any of the protest movement, which many of the soldiers who came back from Vietnam right after the height of the war. I went over in 1968 and came back at 1969, and that was at the height of the war, and the protest movement was really growing by leaps and bounds by that point in time. And I basically avoided all of that. But the protest movement, especially after the Tet Offensive of 1968, which was really the turning point for many Americans in the United States, because they had been assured by the president, by Westmoreland, by the senior officers, by our political leaders, that we were winning the war. And then all of a sudden, this incredible Tet Offensive of 1968 occurred. And while we overcame the Viet Cong, 20-1, we lost about 300 Americans within a very short period of time. And America was just not prepared for it. And there was so much television coverage that, and also Walter Cronkite, who was the voice of America and on television, changed his opinion and said, we're not winning this war anymore. We're in a stalemate. So that aggravated and escalated the protest movement in the U.S. And it's important to understand that for Americans, especially if you have no concept of the Vietnam War, it's important to understand how the public opinion changed dramatically during that 2-year period.
One thing I really appreciated about your book is you have it throughout chapters, like a little letter. And I felt like it was very interesting to see. And I want to ask, the way you formatted the letters, are those actually word by word of letters that you wrote during those times, or is it more like a summary based on your memory?
No, that what happened there was that after about 10 years, I sent the manuscript out to a number of friends of mine, and they all these were military people, and they all said, "This is great. Go ahead, try and get it published." But two of the people I sent it to, and they were both women, one of whom was in the publishing field, the other was a college classmate, said, "Well, I guess you only want to sell this book to veterans." And I said, "No, I want it to appeal to the general reader too." They said, well, you need to demilitarize it. You need to take out all these, or at least explain all these abbreviations that you've used. And you need to put more of your personal feelings into the book. And that was a challenging thing for me to do because I had kept a lot of those feelings bottled up. I likened it to having a titanium steel trunk in the back of my mind. And I locked all those experiences away in that trunk. And so anyway, it took another 2 years to rewrite the book. And one of the things I recalled is that my mother had saved every letter that I wrote home, and she kept them in the envelopes. So they were all date stamped. So I put them in chronological order and I reread every letter. And then I reached in and grabbed actual snippets of the letters I wrote home, and put them into appropriate chapters. So you could read the story that I wrote, which was what really happened to me. And then you read what I wrote home about, which always didn't quite agree. There was a little bit of a juxtaposition there.
We're talking to our special guest today, Robin Bartlett, and his amazing book, Vietnam Combat, Firefights, and Writing History. And man, I must say, when I was reading the chapters you asked me to read, it really felt like a movie. It felt like I was watching a movie, reading the words on the pages. There is so many emotions in this book. There's a lot of graphic, dark things that happen, obviously, but there's also some humor as well. If you have a funny story, which I have a strong feeling I know which one it is, but is there a funny story that you share with the audience that you wrote in this book?
Sure. And now I'll just preface by saying, I had a family to raise. I couldn't sit down and just write every day. I had a job that took me on long airplane flights, and I would whip out my laptop and I'd work on a chapter. And I would become so engrossed in remembering the detail of the event that happened to me that I literally would block out everything that was going on around me. And it was just amazing how much detail my mind would retain. And I could relive the situation. I could see the colors. There were times I could even smell the smells. I know that's crazy, but it's true. And I would come away from some of these events just sweating. But in answer to your question about the humor, new people who joined our unit were called FNGs. That stands for effing new guy. And you couldn't trust one of these new people until they had about a month to 6 weeks of acclimatization, getting used to the heat, 105 to 115 degrees daily temperature, as well as to the routine and humping the boonies, as we used to call it, and developing some confidence in a firefight, and just an awareness, certainly weapons security, and an awareness of protocols and things that our platoon and our company had to do. So we treated the FNGs very carefully, and we watched them to make sure that they were going to be a productive member of our platoon. But an FNG in the base camp, when we were pulling base camp security, we would be out in the field for 4 to 6 weeks, and then we would come into the base camp and pull perimeter security for a week, and that gave you a chance to have some hot food and a shower or two and some clean clothes. But the FNG was given the job of changing the barrels in the latrine. And the way they handled latrines in the Army was the engineers built a two-man latrine out of wood and built it up high. And underneath each hole was a half of a 55-gallon drum. And so you pooped in the drum. And then once a day, an FNG would pull out the dirty can and push in a clean can. So we explained to this MG exactly what he was to do. He was to go to the artillery battery and get an empty shell casing, a 105 millimeter shell casing, which was made out of brass, and fill it with diesel fuel, and then go to the latrine, pull out the dirty can, push in the clean can, pour half of the diesel fuel in one and the other half in the other can, stand back and light a match. And then the diesel fuel would burn off the refuse and you'd stir it. And this FNG did a great job on everything except he filled the canister with jet fuel, with gasoline, as opposed to diesel fuel, because the two bladders were side by side and he didn't read the sign that was right there. So when he poured half of the gasoline into one can and half into the other can, stood back, lit a match, it actually blew the can apart. And we had shit blown all over the area. And it actually caught, the latrine caught on fire. And you saw these two men running out of the latrine. The latrine burned to the ground. And this poor soldier had to help the engineers for the following week. He was on latrine duty. And he had to help the engineers to rebuild the latrine.
Man, that's a visual. Like I said, this book reads like a movie. And when you went through the editing process, did your team, your editors, did they kind of comment as well? Like your stories you can see it. Like you don't just read it and understand it. You can visualize the details.
Well, I had a marvelous college classmate, actually the wife of a classmate who was also a classmate. And she was incredible. She caught every misspelled word, every misplaced comma. And then as she read through the manuscript, she asked a whole bunch of WTF questions. And I figured that if she didn't understand what I was talking about, I needed to rewrite that section so that it was comprehensible. And I owe her a great debt of gratitude, because I don't think the manuscript would have read as well as it does. In the fourth proofing of the manuscript, we only found 4 errors. So, and since publication, I've only found 3. So that's pretty good.
And when you look at just the whole process after you finish publishing the book, I'm sure you read a ton of reviews. I mean, if you had one thing that stuck out and someone reviewing your book, what sticks out to you most from the reactions of people learning about your story? Well,
I'm really very, very proud of 3 reviews and 4 reviews in particular. I got a review from Jan Scruggs, who is the founder of the Vietnam Memorial in Washington, D.C. And I contacted him. I had actually met him on one occasion, but he certainly wouldn't have remembered me. And he wrote me just a marvelous advanced review. He read the manuscript and he gave me a wonderful review. Got a review from Barry McCaffrey, who is an MSNBC news commentator and military analyst. And he also gave me a wonderful review. But the other 2 reviews that I'm most proud of is I have one from my medic and one from my radio operator. And I'm still in touch with a large number of the men who were assigned to A Company, 1st Battalion, 5th Cav, 1st Cav Division. And my call sign was Foggy Day 1-6, 1 being the first platoon leader and 6 being the leader. And the name of our group, we have a Facebook group called the Foggy Day Group. Now, they weren't all members of the company at the same time, but they were members of A Company, 1st Battalion, 5th Cav at one time or another. And there are about 70 of us, and we try to get together at the 1st Cav reunions.
Once again, you listen to Refocus Radio, talking to our special guest today, Robin Bartlett, and you can get his book, Vietnam Combat Firefights and Writing History. You should go to his website, robinbartlettauthor.com. And I want to say that I wanted to be very careful with this interview because I don't want to give all the details away from the book. It's that good, and I feel whoever reads it is going to be very hard to stop reading. It's so many details, not just about the military, but how you communicated with your soldiers and how you all operated on mission. There's so many things that you learn, and as a reader, it felt like we were learning with you. After a mission, you reflect on certain things in the letters and the lessons learned, during the missions. Looking back, if you were to be someone's mentor listening to this right now, who's maybe in the military or is about to be in the military, what's one thing that you would give words of encouragement and wisdom to that person to always strive to be the best and to never give up?
Yeah, that's a very, very broad question and issue. I went through all this training and I was really a badass. After going through all this training and I was to some extent programmed, airborne officer, ranger trained, and went to Vietnam thinking I was best of the best. But when you face a firefight, when you face an ambush, when the bullets start to fly, you come in contact with fear, the kind of fear that sends you to the ground and buries your head in the dirt, and you don't want to get up because you'll know if you do, there's a good chance you'll be killed. I think it's the same kind of feelings that firefighters and first responders and police face as well. But if you're the leader and you're in a firefight, you can literally feel the eyes of every man looking at you and wanting you to make decisions, right or wrong. They want to know what you want them to do. And as the leader, you certainly are afraid. There's no question about it. John Wayne said it best. Courage is being scared to death and saddling up anyway. And that's what you had to do. That's what you have to do as a leader is get tough and saddle up and make decisions. And sometimes I had to put my men in harm's way. I tried not to do that, but it did happen. I did lose men. I was wounded myself, but I always felt very confident, primarily because of my training. But I felt that I could handle the situation and help my men through an adverse situation. So that's kind of a long answer to your question, but hopefully people will be able to kind of take away some good thoughts there.
Yes, and my follow-up question and last question would be, for those who are non-military, they don't have a military career, but they want to support those who are in military and veterans, what is the best way that a person who has good intentions to support someone in the military, what's the best way that they can show their true support?
So there's absolutely nothing wrong with the phrase, "thank you for your service." But Vietnam veterans are beginning to walk in the boots of the Korean War veterans and the World War II veterans. And we're kind of a special breed of cat because for the most part, we were not welcomed home when we came home. And so for Vietnam veterans, the code words are welcome home. If you say welcome home to a Vietnam veteran, you will and watch the result. It's a game changer. You'll bring lumps to our throats and tears to our eyes because it shows that you understand and have an appreciation for what we went through. So those are the code words.
Once again, you listen to our Refocus Radio, talking to our amazing guest today, Robin Bartlett, and his book, Vietnam Combat, Firefights, and Writing History. You can go visit his website, robinbartlettarthur.com. First and foremost, I hope people really get this book because it's like watching history on the pages. So I wanted to say thank you for writing this book. And just like you said earlier, well, to you and to all Vietnam veterans, I want to say what you said. Welcome home. And thank you for what you're doing with this book.
Well, thank you for being such a wonderful host. It was a pleasure, absolute pleasure being with you today.